Why did I choose international adoption? Stay tuned and I will tell you why. Hey guys, today I just want to do a quick video, hopefully quick, on why I chose international adoption as opposed to private or public adoption. Back forever ago I did why don't you just adopt video. I'll post that link and all the other links I talk about up in the cards. But I had done a video about adoption in general, and at the time I was living in a very remote area and adoption was very challenging. Later, probably like, I don't know, a year later, I ended up trying to pursue private adoption. So with private adoption, what happens is you send in your profile, you were chosen by a birth mother, and then she places the child with you. You have X amount of days that she can change her mind. In Manitoba, where I was living, and here in Ontario, it's 21 days. Usually, most places, it's around 21 days to 28 days. I've seen it as short as like 2 weeks, but on average it seems to be around 3 weeks, between 2 and 3 weeks. So anyway, so I had tried to do that, and I had multiple birth moms contact me, but no one wanted to legally place with me. They basically wanted me to raise their children without doing any paperwork, and then later, maybe if they felt like raising the child, they would take them back. I had a couple who wanted money, a couple of mothers who wanted money, but in Ontario and in Manitoba, I think Canada in general, it is not legally allowed to pay the mother anything, not even expenses. In the States, it's often allowed to, you're allowed to pay birth mother's expenses. So basically that was just a disaster, and I reached the end of my rope in terms of my work and my life and just the stress in general over in Manitoba, so I moved back to Ontario. Here in Ontario, basically everything's an option. I talked in another video about pregnancy and like my thoughts about pregnancy, and I've never really wanted to be pregnant. Just pregnancy was easier than the adoption process, and it was supposed to be cheaper too. Which if it had worked, it would have been. But anyway, so for me, adoption was always my first choice. And I had tried to do private adoption, like I said, and I had also tried public adoption, which is adoption from foster care. And unfortunately, where I was living before, that was not an option. They couldn't send social workers to where I was living, so they weren't able to do that. And international adoption, for the agencies that I was able to work with while living in Manitoba, there wasn't very many good options for a single woman and wanting a younger child. And if I wanted, say, a 7-8-year-old, that wouldn't have been a problem, but I did not want a 7-8-year-old. I would want a child under 3. So moving back to Ontario now, I do have multiple options. For private adoption, the reason I am not doing private adoption is simply because I do not have the heart to go through the failures again. It is really hard to get a birth mother to choose you as a single person. Like the average wait for a couple is around 4 to 6 years. For a single woman, it can be 6 to 8 years plus if you ever get picked. And I just don't have the heart to just sit around waiting for that call saying that someone's picked me. And then if they do pick me, I don't have the ability to cope with sitting through that 21-day period, hoping that they don't change their mind. And if they do, going through the grief of losing that child. It's just not for me, and I am not one that really cares if I have a newborn. Like, there's definitely things that I will miss by not having a newborn, but it's just not something that I am dead set on. I have to have a newborn to be happy. So public adoption or adoption from foster care, I have looked into fostering to adopt. So you get the foster child and then your plan is to adopt that child. So of course the foster care system, their plan is to unification, or to get the child to be adopted by a family member. That's their goal, which I understand. So that's their goal. So when going into a foster or to adopt situation, you have to be prepared for the fact that you may not adopt that child. And that's difficult, but it was something I was open to doing. However, because in the area that I'm living in, their rule is if you have a child under 2, in order to foster them, you have to have one parent be stay at home. And unfortunately, I cannot be a stay-at-home parent. So that leaves me unable to foster a child under 2. And the way the foster to adopt whole thing works is it's a very long process, because you got to wait for that child to be eligible for adoption, and then once they're eligible for adoption, you have to go through with the adoption, and then you have to wait like 6 months to a year to have that finalization happen. So it is a very long process. So by the time I actually had everything finalized, the child, even if I was able to get them from birth, might be 5, 6 at the time. I do know a family that's had a child since birth, and I think he's probably around 2 now, and they're still trying to deal with, they want to adopt him, but the social workers want to have his grandmother adopt him or something like that, and it's just really hard for them to go through stuff like that. And even if they do end up adopting him, it could be years from now before everything's finalized. So that is just a long political red tape process that I'm just not willing to deal with. And straight public adoption, like not foster to adopt, just adopting, I probably would not get a young child, because again, there's so much politics and red tape and stuff, and of course their goal is reunification. So by the time the child becomes legally free to adopt, or a crown ward of the system, they tend to be older. And then after placement, you still have that 6 months to a year before finalization. So that's a challenge, because that's a long time to just kind of be sitting and waiting for paperwork and legal stuff to happen. Public adoption is free. I think there's like a couple costs, but it's like, it ends up to be less than $2,000. So it is significantly cheaper than any other adoption process, but it just isn't for me. At this point in my journey, I need something that I can just go step by step, check off my little check boxes, and when I get to the end, I know I'm going to have a child in my arms, and it's going to be finalized quickly. And that's where international adoption comes in. International adoption, what usually happens is I'll do a whole process video, but you do your classes, you do your home study, then you send off your paperwork to the home country. Then that home country puts you on a list, and if you're adopting a healthy child, I know you usually get a number, so you are number 452 on this list. So as you go through, you know that you are moving up in this list. Unlike private adoption, where one couple could be waiting 6 months to get a child, another couple could be waiting 6 years to get a child, even though the one 6 years started way before the one who started 6 months. Because you're waiting for a birth mother to choose you. And same with public adoption, they're trying to match the child, like which family's best for the child, which I totally understand. I totally get that. But again, you might be waiting a while because they're looking for a specific family for this child. So someone that's been waiting 5 years might not get a child as quickly as someone who started the process only 2 years ago. So to me, I need something more with a definitive timeline. For me, I'm doing a special needs adoption, so I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out in terms of like being on a list. But she said, the agency said that the wait won't be very long because I am specifically aiming for a special needs adoption. But I am picking a gender, so that I know might cause more delays, but I am okay with that because as I talked about in the gender video, I do specifically want a female child. So for me, that's worth the extra bit of wait, but it's nice to have like that more definitive process. And then once you get your match, it's just straightforward from there. You won't lose that child unless there's certain countries. I talked with an agency maybe 2 years ago, and they told me that if at any point they found a couple for that child, even though I've been matched with them, I could lose that child to that couple. Even I could be like ready to go pick them up, and I could get a call saying we found a family instead, like a couple instead. So that was not, I was not okay with that. Fortunately, I'm with Bulgaria. I've been told that that's not going to happen. Once I'm matched, I will have, I have to go to Bulgaria to meet the child. Then I can accept the match, and then all the paperwork starts. I just go. Everything will be finalized before I leave the country, and it's done. There is some follow-up visits, but at that point, it's not like a, oh, we're following up, but we might take your kid kind of thing. It's a follow-up just to report back to the home country to make sure that everything's going okay and whatnot. So that is basically with the international adoption. I just think that it's more of a secure way for me to have a happy ending. I'm tired of things falling through, and I'm tired of dealing with being picked. I need something where I can go into the process, do my part in getting my little check boxes done, just wait a short wait for them to match me, and then again just check off my little boxes as I go and know I'm getting somewhere. Whereas I found with private adoption, I was able to check off my boxes really quickly and then just sit around and wait and hope that someone actually went through with it. And I feel like public adoption is like the same thing, where you get everything done. But with them, because the social workers are so overwhelmed with everything, it takes forever to get all those check boxes done. Like the home study and the classes and stuff, you basically are waiting around until they offer the classes. You're waiting around until there's a social worker available to do your home study. They're just overwhelmed with so many things that it's really hard for them to even get to the point where you're finally approved to sit in the wait list, to wait, to hope that they find a child that they feel like your family is a good match for. So I don't want to deal with that. With private adoption, from my first visit, like my first meeting with the agency, till my home study was finalized, was 6 months. And it could have been faster than that, but I was in Ontario for summer, so I didn't do any home study things during the summer. I did one home study meeting at the end of June, and then I didn't have any until August, so end of August. So there was like a 2-month gap where I could have been doing home study visits, and I didn't because I wasn't in Manitoba. But I feel like with international adoption, the timeline just will be happening faster, and I will feel more like in control because I can get stuff done faster. It does cost, obviously, a significant amount of money, but the chosen country that I'm dealing with is actually one of the most cost-effective countries. Even if I was not adopting a special needs child, it is one of the cheaper countries to adopt from, which, yay, finally, because usually it's the opposite for me. It's like, because there's so few countries that allow single females to adopt, and usually if they do, you have to be over 35, or you have to adopt a child that's like 6 and up. So finally I've found a country that not only as a single woman I can adopt without like issue, I also don't have to have a certain weight, I don't have to have a certain age, and I don't have to adopt a child of a certain age. So and then icing on the cake, or whatever the phrase is that it is one of the cheapest countries to adopt from. So that's really nice. So with that, compared to say public adoption, like I said, is only a couple grand, but the years of waiting, and at that time I have to be living in a 2-bedroom apartment. So if I'm waiting, say, 6 or 7 years living in a 2-bedroom apartment that I don't even need, that's a huge added cost. Whereas with international adoption, I can move out of my parents' house as soon as I'm ready to do the home study, because here is the cheapest option for me to be living here, and then just do the adoption process. And then with private adoption, the cost is roughly the same as international, and again, the waiting, I have to be living in, I wouldn't have to live in a 2-bedroom, but I would have to live in a 1-bedroom at least. So I would have to move out of here at least in order to do that process. So it again will cost me long term. So anyway, international adoption is just where I feel like I need to go to. I hate to use the word like called to adopt, because I feel like that's more like a religious term that someone feels like their God is calling them to adopt. But I have always felt in my heart that I should adopt, and I've always looked into all 3 options, and they've just been more beneficial at different points. But right now, international, I think, is definitely the way I need to go. I think back when I thought that the private adoption would have actually worked, that was what I thought at that time, but also international and private or public wasn't available to me. So I kind of settled for private adoption. Whereas I think if I had known then what I know now, I would have went straight to international adoption. I probably would have moved home so I could do that, but I would have went straight to international adoption, where it is more of a secure thing and more of a final thing. And I just think that there are children all over the world that need homes, and it doesn't matter where exactly they're coming from, as long as they are not a country that is obviously like I've heard stories of them pulling kids from loving families, and then, or parents being forced to sell their children for adoption and stuff like that. Just the poverty and whatnot is just atrocious, and in situations like that, it's horrible. But I feel fortunate that the country I am choosing to adopt from is not really like that. I have not heard horrible stories about that. They tend to take care of their kids really well in the orphanages, and just overall, I think it's a good program, and that is my route that I am going. So I hope that kind of explained a bit about international adoption, why I'm going towards international adoption. I'm sorry if I talked fast. I just wanted to get a shorter video out than like 30-40 minutes. But basically that's where I am headed, and that is why I am heading that way. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to follow my journey. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them down below. Thanks for watching, and I shall talk to you guys soon. Bye.